So what's happening is a lot of telcos are currently implementing CORD or about to implement CORD, and they often use open compute components. White boxes, servers from out of the open compute project. The question is, what does this mean for deployment? Because the reasons why the hyperscalers went to these components, it's not just the price, right? So they have lots of other benefits. So what we're doing in CORD is we're changing a central office to a data center, like a hyperscaler would use a data center. But the hyperscaler, they have a certain way of rolling out racks into these into their data centers. So the question is, if we change our central office into data centers, can we use the same concept which hyperscalers have? So first of all, a small explanation of what the difference is between a standard rack with servers and switches in it compared to the open compute version of it. And in this case, I'm talking about the open compute V2 version of the racks. So a traditional rack has servers in there, with each of them having their own power supplies. It's a standard rack for in the traditional world. So one of the differences with the open compute rack is that it has a bus bar, which does the power for the rack. And this is connected to the input, either 3-phase PDU or 48 volt in the telco world. And the rack has the bus bar. It's fed into the bus bar with which has 12 volt on it, and all the power is done on a central spot in the rack and not on each of the components in there, which gives you a lot of efficiency in terms of power, but also in cost. You reduce components, and you have less maintenance. So, and all the servers connect to these bus bars. So there are a bunch of advantages in moving to this direction. Get back to how the hyperscalers roll out the rack. Well, they just roll it in, and it's fully cabled, fully installed. So they just get it in on a lorry or whatever, and they just put it in the room, hook it up to the power, hook it up to the networking out of the rack, and they're done. So they have a real quick way of rolling this out. If we think back to what we're in the CORD environments, traditionally we used to put down huge monolithic boxes from traditional vendors. And what we're doing now is we're changing this into, we're disaggregating them, right? We're changing them into smaller components. So this increases the complexity if you install it on a component level, right? So instead of one box with just hooking up into the power and the networking, if you put down, I don't know, 40 smaller items which you need to cable between and need to connect, this would make sense. It would, instead of increasing the complexity, if we could also do this in our central office, it could, well, maybe keep it either on the same level or it could reduce the complexity of rolling out these central offices. So within KPN, we looked into this. Thought, okay, is this possible to do in our central offices? Well, this is just one picture, because we did some trials with this. This is actually in our test facilities. This is the back of the test facilities. This is the loading bay there. And in the crate, there's the OCP V2 rack. Well, as you can see, upright, rolling it into the building, it will not fit. And this is not the only hurdle. There are a bunch of other hurdles all the way up to the computer floor, which we had in this facility. We also had to look at other facilities to see, do we have similar issues there? And this is one other example. The computer floor is on the second floor. So imagine that this is a pre-cable, pre-filled rack, which weighs, I don't know, 600 kilos. Well, good luck trying to get it up here. And also, it's too high to fit if you need to lift it with people or in another way. So we have some challenges as a telco to roll it out in the same way as the hyperscalers do. So the conclusion for us was this is not possible. And this is not just the case for KPN. So these are some pictures from which are received from Telefonica. So they were actually rolling out similar rack into one of their central offices, and this is how they had to roll it, to get into the building. They had to.
So central offices predate elevators?
Some of them have elevators, but a lot of them don't. These are ancient buildings. These are not the new modern data centers which a hyperscaler has. So our central data centers are more modern. So, but on the central office location, it's, I don't know, some of them are 80, 90 years old.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So we're not, it's not just KPN. This is all over, all over the telco world. I don't think it will be different here in the States, actually. And rolling it out, the standard rack, is not the only challenge which we have with the OCP rack. Another challenge which we have is, what they did is they made it a more narrow rack, so you can squeeze more out of the square meters in your data center. But they did this by also getting rid of the room you have on the side for cabling. So all the cabling is in front of all the other stuff. And maybe for the hyperscalers, that's okay if you just need to connect a port on a server. You have a bunch of servers in there and just one or two top of rack switches. But in the core deployments, there are a lot of switches in there, more switches than servers typically. And that means a lot of cabling between all these switches. And it really quickly becomes a mess with all the cables. It's not easy just to pull out one switch, because all the other cables will be in the way for all the other switches. And yeah, well, you think I have a nice setup with redundancy because I can put in two of these switches in there, but this doesn't work because you cannot pull out one without getting rid of all the other cables, if you look at the standard rack. And this example uses DAC cabling, and these are even sturdier, thicker cables, but even if you also looked into this using fiber cables, and still you don't have room to put the cables in. Another challenge which we have with the rack is the standard rack for the OCP v2 rack is the power zones are divided into two areas. So you have an upper power and a lower power zone, and each power zone can do up to 15 kilowatt, so that's 30 kilowatt in total. On these older offices, central offices, if I go to these guys who manage these buildings, say, oh, I'm going to install a server there with 30 kilowatts, they will laugh at me and say, okay, come back in 20 years, because it will not happen. So what they typically can do is something like 4 to 10K, depending on the location. They also indicate that they have older cooling equipment there, which is not that good in handling hotspots, because you could also say, just going to put down one rack and take out 10 other racks to compensate for the power, but this will not work either. So the standard power setup is not that efficient either for a telco central office. So this part of the presentation I already presented somewhere else at the OCP Regional Summit a year ago, and I tried to get in contact with REC and other parties who could help me with this challenge. And I came into contact with a party called Schneider Electric, which is a platinum OCP member. And together with them, we created a design, which we are looking into to see if we can put this into the OCP accepted spec. So you're not just depending on one party, but another party could just get the design and create it also, or improve upon it. And this is how it looks like. So what we did is we created a rack which is less high. So it's instead of the standard 2.20 meter rack from the OCP v2, it's only 1.66 meter or 65 and a bit. And instead of the standard 60 centimeters, it is 80 centimeters wide, which is, well, in the telco environment, the standard, for us, it's a standard width. But the base of the rack is the same, so it still uses, well, you can still put the standard OCP components in there, because there are other things out there on the market, but then the standard OCP components don't fit in there, and it doesn't have a bus bar or something is different on the bus bar. So it uses the same concept, but it's slightly adjusted so it fits our need as a telco a bit better. What we also did is, instead of putting in 2 of these power zones, we just put in one power zone. So, and there's one power module in the middle which feeds the whole busbar for the whole rack, because we don't need the 2 power zones. I don't see the actual benefit for this. There's already redundancy in the single power the PSU, because you can put in multiple power supplies. And you can also still connect it to different A and B feeds within a single PSU. So again, the intention is to make this rack OCP accepted. The next slide. Oh yeah, some operators indicated that they would like to also to get battery backup unit options in there. So it's kind of option. You either put in one power shelf, which is one OU, or you can put in a BBU shelf and a power shelf, and then instead of using one OU for the power, you use one OU plus 2 OU for the battery backup. But that, for KPN this is not relevant, but for other telcos it was, so we looked into it to see if we could create this as an option in this rack. And with these battery backup shelves, typically you can do something like 3 minutes until your other power facility kicks in to help you. But within our central office, this part was already covered, so we didn't require this. But it will be part of the design that this will be possible. A bit more about the rack, so some pictures from different angles. So all the OU places have options. So what you can do is, in the example, it has, for instance, 2 OU brackets, but you can also replace it by 1 OU bracket. So you can put in more switches. So depending on your setup, if you put in a lot of 2 OU server copies, for instance, that's a standard again within the OCP. You probably want the 2 OU form factor, but if you say, well, it's going to be filled up with switches, then you probably want the other option. So it will be like a configurable option within the rack. One other thing we added is that's where the extra 20 centimeters go to, because the 60 centimeter wide will still be in place in the middle, but on the side there will be 20 centimeters extra, which we can use for the cabling. So there will be what they call a finger guard, so you can use this to loop the cables and use all the cabling between different levels in the rack. You can do it on the 20-meter side, and it will have a rotatable cover, so you can, after you got all your cabling in place, you can close it up again. On the last challenge which we had is how can we get these things, these racks up the stairs. And so what we ran into was a logistic partner who came up with a solution for this. They said, well, we have these electrical stair climbers which we can use to lift heavy equipment up onto stairs. And this is an example how this could look like. They have a max weight of something like 400 kilos, but again, in our center offices, instead of putting a lot of servers in, we'll probably put in a lot of switches in. And then not only the power consumption goes down compared to the hyperscaler server setup, but also the weight will go down. So we did some calculations, and it seems like the 400 kilo will actually fit. So this is something we are currently investigating. So if they explore this a bit further, but this seems a way to tackle the staircase challenge. So why am I presenting this? Well, one of the reasons why I'm presenting this is I would like to get some feedback from the community, from other operators, so we could make this a design not just for KPN and maybe not just for Telefonica, but also for other operators who have similar challenges. So my request to you, audience, is if you have any ideas how we could improve this rack to make it fit more use cases for other, telcos or other operators who also have this challenge with these older buildings, please reach out to me and let me know, so we can see if we can add it to the specification and to the OCP accepted rack, so we can fit more use cases, so everyone can benefit a bit more from that. And that's the reason why I also put in my contact details in there. So if you have some ideas about this, please reach out to me. Questions?
I don't have ideas, sorry.
Okay, well, too bad. Sure.
What is your view on open
I think the challenge is there are a bit too many standards, way too many standards. So Open 19 is another one. So we looked into that a bit, but not that much, because we were mostly also interested in the OCP hardware with the busbar system. And Open 19 is slightly different, so it's not fully compatible. So what I'm hoping for is that a lot of these standards will converge and will end up with one. But
Yeah, I was asking. I attended the Open 19 conference, and at least the value proposition was to solve some of the operational challenges when installing and really making it much more.
OCP does the same, so they're overlapping. I think we should, again, I'm hoping we converge to one standard, not 2 or 3 or 5 of them.
What's a typical deployment? How many racks, how many servers and switches? Is there?
Well, for us in our central office, it really depends on the size of the central office and the amount of traffic. But I think when we start, we'll probably put down 1 or 2 or maybe 3 racks. And that's also the reason why you don't want to change your central office, right? Because if you're going to totally populate it with racks, then you could say, well, I'm going to install an elevator, or I'm going to widen the door so that it can fit in. But if you just put in 2 or 3 racks, then financially it's not, not the best way forward. Other questions or ideas how we can improve? Any operators in the room, by the way, or? Oh, some operators, okay.
As I understand, you make the rack shorter, so it will waste the space of the CO, because the rack usually is very high.
I know, I agree,
short.
but the point is, if I go into one of our COs, they used to be full of these ancient telephone equipment, so you have lots of space in there, empty rooms. So it's not, again, different story for the hyperscalers, because again, they want to squeeze as much out of their square meters of their data centers, of their modern data centers as they can, but our central offices are nearly empty. So I don't care about the 20, 40, 50 extra centimeters. That's not the issue. The issue is getting the rack in.
So you think for KPN, that's the smartest server and switch?
Sure.
I mean, we tend to agree. What it seems like we're seeing, and Tom Anchich, which you probably know represents AT&T, and I'm from AT&T, so I always defer to Tom's opinion on this. But what we've seen, the same thing with you, is the CO space has become much more retiring of equipment, the hotspot problem. But as far as real estate, we don't mind a high rack. The problem is it's almost a commitment where we see a lot smaller density, to where most of the deployments that I see, even for this last, quote, smaller, that's something like an OE19, seems to be more appealing initially to get us in, and then as we get scale, then I think you fall back to a much bigger solution where you need that compute density and that switch.
Yeah.
So I see a problem with a small quarter rack height, kind of get it in there, get a beachhead, if you will, get the established from operations, get the CO managers, et cetera, used to that type of a solution, and then get conditioning, and then you introduce the behemoth.
We also looked at the quarter rack, because you see the quarter rack going around in at least in the shows like this, right? As a demo, but the thing, at least for us, the power comes from the top. So if it's something like 168 or 17, then the power is still up there, right? So it's okay. But if it's on this height, I don't want the power sticking out like this, going up to the ceiling.
But I mean, we deal with that every day with normal equipment. So for the BDFB, it's going to come back to your bus bar. You're going to typically load the rack from bottom up, unless you got people with more muscle than frontal lobe. It's just easier that way.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where, from a practical standpoint, to get in and establish your compute environment in a CO, is when you start to go big. Everything from a business case, an operational component, if you can sneak it in with a smaller rack and establish it and build on that. It's almost like this last one, if you had it modularized into rackable. The other thing with the OE19, and not that I'm a big fan, but it would go in a standard rack today, where I could go in, I could bolt that in, I don't have a big change. It fits in the lineup where they've retired, and then I could go. It's almost a retrofit as opposed to a greenfield build, which everybody in the COs you're in a retrofit situation, not a, greenfield new data center.
Yeah.
And that's been the struggles I've seen at the AT&T side for a CO. You go in there and they're, set up for this one form factor. Everything from EF and I changes, which drives us all bananas of how much it costs to do a server versus a pluggable, a shelf or a sled or what
Yeah,
have you.
yeah.
So, but I imagine it's not any different than what you guys have seen. Everything you've said here, I can resonate with
Yeah, okay.
completely. Basically, my rule of thumb is if two guys can't carry it up the stairs, it ain't getting up there.
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, that's probably the litmus test for size and weight.
Have you guys explored the idea of just mothballing the old central offices and starting over in a building next door?
If we would
And
have
selling
enough
that-
money, then yeah. But I mean,
But you make
it's
money
a tough
because-
business at the moment, right? Revenues are going down. And we still,
Yeah.
so
You make money by selling the central office.
yeah, well, so we've
Because
done
there's
that.
lots of
So
empty space
we've
there.
shrunk down in central office. So
Uh-huh.
we used to be at something like 250, and now we're shrunk down to 160. But these are the central points where all the cabling ends up for whole cities and areas. So we cannot just change that. Sorry? In the Netherlands, which is quite small, but 160 locations at the moment.
Any thoughts on bringing 48 volts to the rack instead of 120 or
Sorry, any thoughts on?
48 volts DC to the rack? I don't know about your COs, but ours are.
Yeah, so our
all built.
COs. So in my test facilities, I started with the 380 volt version. Then I started talking to our central office managers, and they said, well, there's no 380 here. So there's only 48 volt, but for the OCP V2 rack, there is the converter, or you have the power supply will actually convert from 48 to 12 volt.
Oh, okay, so the PDU you were showing is a 48. To
Oh, it's
12
not the
volt.
PDU. PDU is just the connection to the power distribution unit. But the PSU in there, so you have either the flavor which converts from 380, or the version which converts from 48 volt to 12 volt. And in our COs, that's the one we'll be using, but maybe for, I don't know, for a different telco it will be different. But there are a bunch of flavors in there. But 48 volt is a standard, but not in the V2 rack. The V2 bus bar and all the equipment you put on there, that's 12 volt. So you need to convert it.